You ever watch Demon Slayer? It's so crap.
Back in 2002, the film Spirited Away even won the festival's Golden Bear.
This story is about a book that fell from the sky, and you can write any name in it, and they die.
I kind of want to watch that show and see what it's about.
But Japanese anime killed it in places like China and the US.
How did anime start? It's no surprise anime is massive now. I think for a lot of us, it's like the only medium we have grown alongside. Like when I was a kid, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Cardcaptor Sakura were all I needed. Man, those were the days. And then I became a teenager and realized girls were indeed a thing. So naturally, harem to the rescue. Oh my god, Kameko DX, To Love Ru, Love Hina, White Album, EF, A Tale of Melodies. There were literally entire seasons where I just watched harem. And as I went through every stage in life, anime always had something to offer. Like I could turn my brain off, self-insert into a romance I know I'm never gonna have, or just relate because this is me for real. Anime has given me so many good memories over the years, but there's just something that irks me like nothing else. It's the fact that I realize I've loved this medium for over 20 years, but I know jack shit about it. Like yes, anime came out of Japan, but there has to be more to this. So I literally hit the books, read everything I could, documentaries, articles, interviews, whatever I could just get my hands on, and surprise, surprise, there is a lot to the story. If I had to make the most terrible analogy ever, anime is like a shonen protagonist. They have to deal with disasters, rivals, and villains that are just pure evil. It's a ridiculous story, and I am going to take you down this rabbit hole and show you how the history of anime is kinda like an anime. And it all starts with a renaissance that swept through Japan. If I had to describe the Taisho era in one word, it would be abundance, especially when it came to Western entertainment. You had dancing, singing, music, and of course, animation. But there was still no such thing as Japanese animation. Why? Because 16. It took 16 different drawings to animate just one single step. In fact, Paul Terry, the creator of the iconic Mighty Mouse, once got an offer for a cartoon that was worth less than the film he used. And then when he was like, what the hell? The guy told him the film was worth more before he put his cartoons on it. So yeah, animation wasn't exactly profitable. Fact known very well by one of Japan's first animators, Kitayama Seitaro. So to get his foot into the door, Seitaro found a unique workaround. Because while animation was non-existent, the film industry was popping off. They went from having one theater to over 300 in just a decade. And one of the main players was Nekatsu. If that name sounds familiar, they've recently made one of the best isekais I've watched, which is Reincarnated as a Sword, and one of the worst, which was One Turn Kill Nei-san. God, that was bad. Seitaro knew that on his own, he would never have the tools needed to pursue animation. So he offered his skills to Nekatsu, which again, had nothing to do with cartoons because no one cared about that. Seitaro's job became to make films better by adding things like subtitles. But Seitaro was about to learn an important lesson in life, which is the fact that if you put yourself out there, things can happen. Because one of the perks of working for such a giant like Nekatsu was access to literal legends, like Makino Shozo, the father of Japanese cinema, who would change Seitaro's life. Because at the moment, the Japanese government was in a bit of a dilemma. They found themselves censoring films left, right, and center because of its power to influence people. Especially French films at the time that had all these themes of revolution and overthrowing the monarch, you know, as French people do. And Japan had a monarch at the time and they wanted to keep it that way. The two were not vibing. But there were people in the government that wanted to harness the power of film, and Shozo would make that happen. He secured a deal for Kitayama to make animation for the government, which was a dream come true. But here's a question, what kind of animation did the government want? I'm gonna keep it 100 with you. I looked forever and couldn't find a single one. They don't exist, and for a very good reason we're gonna get into later. However, we do know the descriptions, and the first one was called Itazura no Post, describing the dangers and obstacles in delivering mail. And the next one was called Recommendations for Your Savings, showing the difference between a smart person who saves money and a dumb person who spends it, and how much better off the smart person is. I'm assuming these are kind of PSAs, not my cup of tea, but the government loved them. They gave Seitaro so many contracts that he was able to start up Japan's very first animation studio, Kitayama Filmworks Production, taking on bizarre requests like the time the government wanted to push this idea where they burn trash to produce energy. So essentially, a dumpster fire that produces energy. And that's not even the craziest part, because apparently when the scientists described this idea to like politicians, they were like, we don't care. But the second Kitayama rolled out the animation, everyone was on board. For a no-name studio, this was a game changer. Seitaro even got praise from the Crown Prince, opening doors no one knew existed. Because at the time, Japan's economy was booming, creating insane competition between businesses. Companies tried everything: billboards, magazines, radios, whatever would get people to pick their products. And when they saw Seitaro's animation and the fact that it was actually working, they wanted in, which had the man rolling in cash. Listen, it's not like there weren't other animators. If you look up the first anime ever, you're gonna see The Dull Sword by another pioneer, Junichi. Anime started with 3 pioneers, but only Seitaro was able to make it profitable by selling it as advertisement and PR. This let him start up Japan's very first animation studio and put out a body of work that was more diverse than anyone else's. But if he made so many animations, why am I not able to show you any of them? Well, it's because of the tragedy that happened next. On September 1st, 1923, Japan changed forever. An earthquake hitting 7.9 on the Richter scale ripped through the Kanto region, destroying thousands of buildings and taking over 140,000 lives. Raging fires burned down everything. People lost their homes, they lost their belongings, jobs, with no idea what to do next. Every industry came to its knees, including animation. The earthquake destroyed nearly every single studio in Tokyo, the hub of entertainment. Nikatsu wouldn't open for another decade, and the fires destroyed any evidence of domestic cartoons. That's why I couldn't show you anything. They were all erased from history. But the earthquake didn't just erase the physical, it also erased the cultural. Like I said, Tokyo was the hub of entertainment. If you wanted to make it in the industry, that's where you had to go. Everyone had a certain way of doing things, a certain expectation to live up to, but with that hub now gone, it was anyone's game. A Wild West, giving rise to a second generation of animators, one of whom would take the industry to the next level. One of the most fun parts about reading up on the history of anime is how 2 people can start off at the same exact spot but have wildly different stories. Because the legendary Shozo didn't just mentor Seitaro, but another young man, Kenzo. But his journey was not the same. Because while Seitaro got to the top very fast, Kenzo did not have that luxury. He took a loan from his dad to create a film that didn't even break even, so there goes that money. So his mentor Shozo advised him to try acting. Because he was a good-looking guy, so Kenzo's like, sure, why not? But Kenzo retired after a single movie. Why? Because he had no acting talent. So he found himself making educational films at Nikatsu, like a lot of other animators. But his department stopped getting work and it shut down, so he failed at that too, which was like his backup plan. I am getting secondhand depression here. Listen, I'd like to say I'm persistent, or maybe I'm just too stupid to know when to give up, but if I took as many L's as this man, I'd be questioning a few things. But you gotta give the guy credit. He did not give up. He took another loan from his previous employer to start his animation business, making 2 back-to-back films with a similar theme to Tarzan. And somehow that changed everything. But to understand why, you have to understand the one thing that lived rent-free in every animator's head at the time.
Dreamed up these characters, did you think of them as simply as comic animals, or were you concerned with them as human personalities?
Well, no, I'd say human personalities in the body of a cartoon animal.
Disney. They terrorized the market, and it's not surprising to see why. Disney was insanely ahead of its time, especially in the 1930s with the release of Steamboat Willie, which was the first animation with a fully synced soundtrack. And listen, once you get sound, it's kinda hard to go back. The Japanese audience was hungry for sound, and opportunity studios are not gonna pass up. A major breakthrough was the first commercially successful film with sound, which was a bit of a curveball. Because when you're thinking successful film, you're probably thinking like, oh, a famous samurai movie, or like a period drama that was really good. But The Neighbor's Wife and Mine was nothing like that. It was about a writer trying to do his job, but his wife and kids just keep getting in the way. It's straight up slice of life, which was not too popular back then. Until one of Japan's biggest studios completely rebuilt itself using this genre. I've already told you about Nikatsu, but there was another big player, Shochiku. And if you like anime movies, you've definitely watched something they produced. Tsubasa Chronicles, Cardcaptor, Blood Sea, A Silent Voice. But after the Great Kanto earthquake, they were in trouble, so they sent most of their staff to Kyoto, leaving behind this one guy, Shiro, with a monumental task to rebuild their studio in Tokyo from scratch, but without any of the directors that made them famous or well-known actors to draw people in. With zero options in sight, Shiro did the unthinkable. He gambled. What if his lack of resources wasn't a curse? What if it was a blessing? He devised a whole new category of films called Shomengeki, films that focused on the daily lives of average people. Kinda sounds familiar now, doesn't it? This made the audience the star of the show. It wasn't about highlights or theatrics. It was about the minutia of day-to-day life, things people could relate to. And this would be how Japan made its very first voiced anime. Shiro, after witnessing the success of Steamboat Willie, wanted his own, so he reached out to Kenzo to work together and make Japan's very first spoken anime. And the process was gruesome. Even with 8 people, it took them over 6 months. For contrast, a silent animation only took 1, but they did it, creating Japan's very first spoken anime. Power and women in society. And out of all the films, I wish I could have shown this one to you guys. Part of it is because it's just really cool, and the other part is because it's batshit insane. The story is about a salaryman who keeps getting berated by his wife, so he goes out and has an affair, you know, as one does. And the wife finds out, so she decides to have a boxing match with the other woman? What is this, YouTube? But the other woman sprays the wife with a water hose and wins. Let this be a lesson to you. Anime didn't just get weird, it was always this way. But thanks to Shiro and the rise of Shomengeki, an anime like this was greenlit, doing 2 massive things for the industry. One was obvious. It featured Japan's very first seiyus, aka voice actors. The salaryman was played by a famous comedian, Roppa Furukawa, and his wife by theater star Saorenko. But there is more to this film than just voice actors, and a lot of it has to do with what goes on beneath the surface. Because this movie is rumored to be Japan's very first use of cell animation. Now I'm gonna level with you. I didn't know why that was important. I'm someone that just likes watching the pretty stuff on the screen. I don't have any idea of what goes on behind the scenes. And if you're anything like me, you're like, okay, cell animation, why does that matter? And after looking it up, I can tell you why. None of your favorite shows would ever be possible without cell animation. Because up to this point, Japanese animators primarily use cutout animation. Think of it like using paper dolls. You cut out shapes for characters and objects. Then you put them against a background and slightly move them to where you want them to be. Then you take a picture, move it again, take another picture, rinse and repeat, creating the illusion of movement. The problem is these dolls can only bend or move, so there's not a lot of flexibility here. But that's where cell animation comes in. Animators draw on transparent sheets called cells, hence the name cell animation. Common examples of the type of stuff that'll go on these cells are characters, special effects like rain, snow, fire, and things that are subtle yet so important, like a character's change in expression. TLDR, anything that's gonna be changing is going on a cell, while static things like backgrounds are gonna go on something a bit more permanent. And when you layer those transparent cells on top of a background, you get a scene. And then the animator's job is to anticipate what the next movement is gonna look like, and draw that bad boy on another cell. Replace out the old cell with a new one, rinse and repeat. And voila, the animation is moving. Each cell is a single frame of animation, and when played in sequence, creates the illusion of movement. But why would animators do this? Because on the surface, it looks like so much more work than cutout animation. And you're 100% right. Disney's Snow White took over 200,000 of these transparent sheets to make. But the reason animators prefer it is because of the quality. The hand-drawn movements you get out of cell animation look so fluid and lifelike, you just can't compare. That's why from this point on, all the way to the 1990s, it would be the industry standard. Responsible for some of the best stuff we've seen, including Akira, Cowboy Bebop, Evangelion, and everything Studio Ghibli. And I love the story of a dude that failed at everything he did but just never gave up and created this landmark in Japanese animation history. However, everything I've read so far suggests that anytime there's some sort of up, there must be an equivalent down. And I was right, because while Kenzo was trying to prop up the animation industry, things were about to get real bad. The 1930s were a terrible time for Japan. The Great Depression led to a lot of people losing their jobs, which then led to civil unrest. Everyone was on edge, and Japan needed resources to keep up its heavy industry, so they looked outwards to Manchuria. Japan's military was impressive because of Russian conflicts and World War I. So with economic and political pressure, Japan invaded Manchuria, which was controversial to say the least. It led to global condemnation. Even the US was like, that's too much. Which pissed Japan off even more, leading to further isolation, making it important for Japan to pump more and more of its money into the military, giving them so much influence. Influence which would find its home inside every industry, including animation. Early signs were a major push to paint the West as enemies, especially the United States. You can see it in a subtle way in the 1931 film Momotaro of the Sky, where a Japanese folklore hero has to save helpless animals from the clutches of the evil eagle. The eagle obviously symbolizing America. And when subtle doesn't cut it, you can just go all out, like using Popeye as an enemy, or this strange rendition of a Mickey Mouse fighter plane. Honestly, I'm not sure if all this is propaganda. It could just be saltiness with more than enough reason, because Japanese animation was still in direct competition with the West and losing badly. Getting cell animation was great, sure, but the West also had it, and for longer. Cell animation was also ridiculously expensive, and so was setting up sound. And even if Japanese animators could front all of those costs, theaters would still choose a Mickey Mouse film because it was cheaper and better quality. The West was like this insurmountable behemoth, and Japanese animators hated it. They hated the fact that they couldn't make anything good because the medium wasn't profitable for them. So they found themselves making these propaganda films, a great example being the Mabo series, which was supposed to be about a cute little troublemaker like Dennis the Menace, but it did not stay cute for long. Look at this. It starts off cute like Mabo's Great Race, where he tricks other people so he can win competitions. But it starts getting real strange, like Mabo's War Chronicles of Tough Fighting in the South Seas, which raises a lot of questions, the first one being, why the South Seas? And this is where we get into some of the most horrendous stuff. The Japanese military at the time pushed an idea called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which says, hey, all these Asian countries should come together, become self-sufficient, and be free from Western influence. Which on paper doesn't sound bad, but there is a fine print that Japan should be the de facto leader. And you know what Japanese leadership looks like. It looks like them taking Manchuria with no one's consent. And what they tout as this quote-unquote Eastern Sphere of Prosperity is codename for them just taking over all these countries. This idea was all over animation, like the 1932 film Plain Cabbie's Lucky Day, where these faraway Asian lands were shown as treasure chests for the Japanese to just come in and take. And the inhabitants were shown as stupid animals. And I'm gonna let you figure out what that means because I really don't want to say it. And of course, the Japanese adventurer is shown as a human because you gotta self-insert, am I right? Now, this wasn't every animation at the time. For example, Nobuo Fuji had this really cool style of animating using washi, traditional Japanese paper, which gave his stuff a distinct look. But examples like him were rare, especially when the Japanese government turned it up a notch by introducing the film law. Up till this point, if the government didn't like a film, they could just ban it. But with the film law in place, no one could even make anything without government approval. Also, the government could just go in, change details, and affect the overall message of the film. By all accounts, this law would mean the death of creativity. But surprisingly enough, not only did some animators accept these conditions, but cheered them on. Because the film law, in a ridiculous move, banned any and all Western films. Which means no more Mickey Mouse, no more Betty Boop. Import of Western films was no longer a thing, and the ones already in Japan would be confiscated. For the first time in history, Japanese animators had no competition, which posed an interesting fork in the road. Give up creative freedom and work as a cog in the propaganda machine, or rise up against it. Some tried and were sent straight to jail. Don't pass go, don't collect 200. Some reluctantly agreed, and some happily agreed. Not surprising to see why. You saw a similar sentiment in the manga industry where the Tokyo Manga Studio literally said, yeah, use manga as propaganda. Listen, if you devote your entire life to a craft, but are always seen as secondhand, you're gonna build some serious resentment. A person's need to feel important is a motivator like you would not believe. So maybe animators felt like this was their chance, their opportunity to make a name for themselves by working together with the government, no matter the cost, creating a symbiotic relationship. And in 1939, the government took this to a whole new level by handpicking 30 different animators and creating a special unit called the Shadow Staff. What an edgy name, goddamn. And what was the point of the so-called Shadow Staff? Well, first off, all the work they did would never be shown to the public. Which is also my way of saying, I can't show you anything. Even if I had the footage, I couldn't show you. Right now, I feel like the FBI is watching. Because the Shadow Staff were tasked with making instructional films, kinda like the ones you saw Seitaro make. But the subject matter was a bit more on the sensitive side. Here's a hint, one of them was called The Principles of Bombardment. I think you know where I'm going with this. The Shadow Staff's job was to create instructional films to guide Japanese troops on the technical side of waging war. The government figured out early on that when it came to teaching, animation was the golden standard, and it wasn't only the Japanese government. What, you think it's a coincidence that Donald Duck is a sailor? America had its own animation propaganda adventure. But on the Japanese side, the Shadow Staff produced over 21 films, most of which lost, but here's some we know about. Bangers, quite literally, like torpedo essentials, naval aviation combat, wireless and radar. And for Japanese animators, it was an unprecedented adventure. They got access to military secrets. They were brought onto aircraft carriers, got to hang out on Navy vessels, even drop bombs from fighter planes. And on the military side, apparently this project was a massive success because they poured even more money into animation, letting Japanese animation at one point surpass Hollywood's output. Even still, nothing would compare to what the animation industry was about to see. In 1941, the Japanese government held a top secret meeting with only high-up personnel and the best animators in the industry. They had something Japan's top talent needed to see because the military could not believe it. And in hindsight, probably not a good idea because it might make Japan's top animators lose every bit of motivation they had. Regardless, the film rolled. The scene opens up with an orchestra from Master of Ceremonies Deems Taylor. And from that moment on, you are glued to the screen. A collection of short stories draws you in with colorful characters and gorgeous music. Drama, suspense, none of the animators in the room had ever seen anything like it. It was like seeing into another world, a pinnacle of what animation could become. Some cried and some just stared in utter disbelief. Because the men in that room made black and white instructional films. In no universe could they ever compete on equal terms with what they just saw. Disney's Fantasia. Truly worthy of being a feature-length film. Which begs the question, what the hell is a feature-length film? I see this term being thrown everywhere, but I never know what it means. So I looked it up, and turns out it has more to do with how the film is marketed rather than what goes in it. And it was a massive deal for animation at the time. Because even in Hollywood, cartoons would always be second to films. They're like the opening act at a concert. It's fun, but it's not why you're there. But a feature-length animation, that's its own attraction. It's the reason why you show up. There's no hard or fast rule to how long it has to be, but it has to be long enough for someone to want to pay for it. By this point, Disney had a few feature-length films under its belt: Snow White, Pinocchio, and now Fantasia, and Japan had zero. And with the arrival of another feature-length film, not from the US, but war-torn China of all places, Princess Iron Fan, the Japanese government finally got the push to try their own hand at making a feature-length film. And the man they would choose for the job is the worst person on paper. Seo Mitsuo. The man got to start dabbling in animation, but soon learned the lesson that every animator did: no one is going to pay you to do this. So he took whatever opportunity was available, which meant joining the Proletarian Film League. A scary group to be a part of because they were very, very anti-government. But it was a place where Mitsuo could get the tools he needed to practice animation. And boy, did he use those tools to clown on the government, making films that totally ripped on that whole co-prosperity BS. And the military did not take kindly to that. They don't mess around. They disbanded the league and put Mitsuo in prison where he was tortured. So it's utterly absurd that later on the government would give this man 200,000 yen to make their biggest film project ever. But it is a testament to how far just trying can get you. Because as soon as Mitsuo got out of prison, he hit up Kenzo and asked to work on women and power in society. Think about the balls on this guy. He just got sent to prison for making animation, and the first thing he does when he's out is beg to be on a high-profile project. And funny enough, he got his chance. Kenzo was low on manpower, so he's not gonna turn down another body. So Mitsuo got to train under one of the most innovative animators at the time, which clearly shows in Mitsuo's own animation, Ari-chan, one of the first in Japan to use the multi-plane camera. Obviously introduced by Walt Disney, because who else is gonna do it? You could use it to split your animation up into multiple planes, literally unlocking a whole new dimension. But again, if you're a noob like me, you're going, okay, great, why does that matter? And I was gonna come up with this whole elaborate explanation, but honestly, nobody does it better than the creator of the thing himself, Disney. He's like, okay, say you're walking at night and you see the moon up above. As you walk closer to the moon, you're not gonna see it getting bigger. And conversely, if you walk away from the moon, it's not gonna get smaller. But when you rely solely on cell animation, that's exactly what happens. You're putting cells directly on top of each other. It feels flat because it is flat. But the multiplane camera changes all of that. You can use it to put the moon all the way over at the back here, but still move everything else in the shot. Moon stays constant while all the other stuff is fluid. It's so simple, but so freaking smart, making animation feel one step closer to the real deal. But alongside learning this new tech, Mitsuo had a bit of a side gig: to make illustrations for the military. That's right, the man who made anti-military films, who got sent to prison for making them and tortured, was now helping the government. I'm just gonna say it, kind of an ends justifies the means person, but it did make him unique. Very few people were on the cutting edge of animation tech while working for the government, giving him a shot at making Japan's very first feature-length film. And it was a process unlike anything else. First of all, staff was hard to come by. Yeah, sure, Mitsuo had money, but this was peak World War II. People were getting drafted left, right, and center. And what's worse, routinely you would hear airplanes above, any of which could be a bombing raid. And to top it all off, they were running out of cells. This was wartime. Any resource is precious. But ultimately, through skill, grit, and determination, they persevered, creating an infamous wartime animation. An adaptation of the Momotaro folklore, a hero that fights ogres with a merry group of animal companions. The movie was named Momotaro Sea Eagles, adapted, by the way, to mimic real-world events. And just to make things fun, I'm gonna tell you what happens in the movie, and you're gonna guess what it's about. So the movie starts in rough waters, just like in the folklore. And keeping in theme, it also has a merry group of animal companions. And they're surprisingly wholesome. They're making fun of each other, laughing. It's a good time. And then you see Momotaro, the main man himself, with all the swag of an isekai protagonist, pointing to a place they need to attack. Surely that is the metaphorical island of ogres. So they ready their planes, and the headbands give away that the animals are indeed Japanese. Also, side note, throughout the entire thing, you're gonna see so many examples of the multiplane camera creating some outstanding backgrounds. And when the animals spot their target, you see exactly who the ogres are, which is Bluto from Popeye? And I wonder whose flag that is. Well, Momotaro gives the order and the animals go ham. The dumb ogres are no match for the smart Japanese. So, what is this about? Well, this is World War II, and the iconic Japanese attack on the Americans would be, that's right, Pearl Harbor. And something they want to highlight to show their people that, yeah, we can win, painting themselves as Momotaro, the legendary hero, who will for sure win against the dumb American ogres. Possibly the biggest case of main character syndrome I've seen to date, but smart from a propaganda point of view. Because the sinister part of this movie isn't about the attack, it's about everything leading up to the attack. The goal of this entire movie was to get more young people to enlist in the military, to throw away their lives for the Empire. That's why they made the animals cute and cuddly, to appeal to a younger demographic. To make war seem like fun, it's like just hanging out with the boys, shooting missiles and stuff. It starts off cute to reel you in, so you don't notice the depraved stuff underneath the frames. And Mitsuo knew that. He knew that what he had created might get a lot of young men killed. His right-hand man went on record wondering the same thing. None of that guilt, by the way, stopped them from making a sequel. Momotaro's Divine Warriors, with better writing, better animation, better storyboarding, better everything but the one thing that actually mattered: timing. Because the movie came out in 1945, and given the other things that happened in 1945, I'm just gonna guess people had more pressing matters to attend to. But I can't emphasize how ridiculously important these years were for anime as a whole. Because of all these weird projects, the industry got boatloads of money it would never normally get. Like just in sheer bodies, Japan had like 100 animators before the war, but after the war they had like 500. And Kenzo, remember the guy who made Japan's first spoken animation, along with other wartime animators, would use these bodies to create this small little company called Nichido. You've probably never heard of them, but you have definitely heard of what they would go on to become, because it gave us the shows that made a lot of us anime fans to begin with. Toei Animation. And what about Mitsuo, the guy who made Japan's very first feature-length animation? Well, to be honest, after the war, he gave up on animation as a whole. But he might have had the biggest influence out of them all. One even he didn't know about. Because his animation inspired one boy who just sat there and stared in utter disbelief at how good it was. Not the storytelling part, because even a kid can tell, oh, this is just propaganda bullshit. But how good the animation was from a technical point of view. Japan could make incredible stuff, but they were stuck making these propaganda nationalistic films. So the boy swore one day to make his own animation, but that would be setting the bar really low. Because not only would he become a world-famous mangaka, a doctor, but create one of Japan's national icons, which would become the catalyst for the entire anime industry as we know it. But hey, that's a story for another day.